She didn't beg him. She didn't explain. She only gave him one rule: never light a candle at night. And for a long time, he obeyed. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. And the night he broke that rule, something in that room woke up. In the village of Ugwama, nestled between the crooked hills of the old forest and the brown gleaming river they called Ojimiri, there lived a man named Tobe Nwasu. Tobe to those who loved him. He was 31 years old, broad-shouldered, with palms like the bark of an Iroko tree, and a laugh that had a way of pulling even the most tight-lipped elders into a grin. He farmed cassava on 2 plots of red earth and sold his surplus at the Wednesday market in the next town. He was not rich, but he was full of life, full of warmth, full of the kind of stubborn joy that does not require permission to exist. His mother had died when he was 12, and his father had remarried and drifted away into the business of that new family. So Tobe had learnt early how to be self-sufficient. He cooked for himself. He mended his own roof when the rains came. He tended his plots with a patience that the older farmers envied. At night, he sat on the wooden veranda of his small mud house with a cup of palm wine and stared at the sky over Ugwama. And he was content. Or, he told himself he was. But there's a difference between contentment and completeness. And somewhere in his 31st year, Tobe began to feel the distance between the two. His age mates were married. Children chased chickens in their compounds. Wives called them in from the evening air. There was a wholeness to those households that Tobe would observe through low fence walls and clay doorways, and he would feel something stir in his chest. Not quite longing, not quite loneliness, but something between them, restless and unnamed. He had courted 2 women before. The first, Adaeze, had left for Lagos with a lorry driver and never returned. The second, Ngozi, had chosen a man with more land. Tobe did not blame either of them. He simply folded their memories away and continued. It was the dry season. In the month of January, when the harmattan came from the north and covered every surface in the village with a thin white dust, that he first saw Adaora. She had come to Ugwama with her uncle, a traveling trader of herbal medicines who passed through the village twice a year. Tobe saw her at the evening market, standing beside a spread of dried leaves and bark, wrapping small parcels in brown paper with the focused quiet of someone who was used to walking unseen. She was not the most striking woman he had ever looked at, but there was something about her stillness, something in the way she moved, deliberate and unhurried, like water finding its own level, that made Tobe stop walking and simply stare. She looked up and caught his eyes. She did not look away quickly, the way girls sometimes did. She held his gaze for a full, strange moment, and then returned to her parcels as though nothing had happened. But Tobe had felt it, whatever it was, land somewhere inside him and take root. He approached her uncle that evening. By the end of the following week, he had returned 3 times to speak with her directly. By the end of February, he had begun to think that the unnamed thing in his chest finally had a name. Adaora was from a village called Inachi, 2 rivers and a forest away from Ugwama. She did not speak much about her people. When Tobe asked about her mother, she said her mother had passed. When he asked about her father, she said the same. When he asked about siblings, she smiled, that quiet, water-still smile, and said, "Some things are better left as silence between 2 people who are just beginning." He accepted this. He was not a man who needed to fill every space with words. What drew him deeply to Adaora was the way she saw things. She would notice a spider's web in the corner of his veranda and stand looking at it for a minute or so before speaking. She knew the names of birds by their calls alone. She would sometimes stop walking in the middle of a path, tilt her head slightly, and say, "Something passed here recently." And when he pressed her, "What do you mean, something?" she would only shake her head gently and continue walking. The old women of Uguama whispered, as old women do. They said the girl had a peculiar air, that her laughter, when it came, was always a half-beat delayed, as though she were translating something from another language into joy. One woman, Mama Agbona, whose age had given her the right to say anything, told Tobe plainly, "That girl carries something, my son. Something old. Look well before you step." Tobe listened. He always listened. And then he proposed. The marriage rites were modest but genuine. Adaora's uncle stood in for her family, palm wine was shared, kola nut was broken. The village watched and clocked its collective tongue, and then the watching was over. They were husband and wife, and Adaora came to live in Tobe's small mud house beside the red path near the mango grove. For the first few weeks, he thought he had never been so happy. She was a good wife in all the ways the village would measure. She woke before him and had water heating by the time he rose. She kept the compound swept. She cooked with a skill that surprised him. Flavors she combined that he had never tasted, spices he did not recognize. At night, she was warm and close and real, and he would lie beside her in the dark, listening to her breathe and feel that wholeness he had been missing settle over him like a cloth. It was in the third week of their marriage that she made him a promise. They had been sitting on the veranda, the evening deepening around them, when the power went out, as it often did in Uguama, where the electricity was unreliable and the generator fuel expensive. Tobe reached instinctively for the box of candles he kept on the shelf by the door. Adaora's hand closed around his wrist. Her grip was not rough, but it was sudden, and the speed of it startled him. He turned. In the dim last light of dusk, he could see her face, and the expression on it was one he had never seen before. Not fear exactly, but something wider than fear, something older. "Tobe," she said, and her voice was very quiet. "I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you will never light a candle. Not in this house, not near me, not anywhere as long as I am with you. No candle. Promise me." He stared at her. "Adaora, what are you—" "Promise me." Her fingers tightened. Her eyes did not waver. There was a pleading in them, deep and raw, that silenced the question on his tongue. He promised. He set down the candle. He used a torch instead that night. And in the morning, when he tried to ask her what that was about, she brought him his food and sat with him and said nothing, and the subject slipped away from them like water from a cupped hand. A man can keep a promise and still be haunted by the reason for it. Tobe kept his. He removed every candle from the house the very next day. He told his neighbors when they visited that Adaora was afraid of fire. A small lie that satisfied them. He bought a powerful battery-powered lantern and kept it charged. When the power went out, which was often, they sat in that artificial light and life continued. But the question lived inside him like a splinter. He asked her again a month after the promise. They were lying in bed, the village outside gone quiet, and he said carefully, softly, "Adaora, the candle. I need to understand." She was still for a long moment. Then, "You promised, Tobe." "I know. I am keeping the promise. I just want to know why." Silence. Then she turned away from him, toward the wall, and pulled the cloth over her shoulder, and said nothing more. He lay beside her in the dark and listened to his own thoughts multiply. He asked again in the third month. She shook her head and looked at him with those deep, water-still eyes, and said only, "Trust me, my husband. That is all I am asking." He tried. He genuinely tried. He threw himself into the life they were building, the farm, the house, the slow accumulation of small domestic joys. But the question was always there. sitting at the corner of every peaceful moment like a shadow that arrived before its owner. He began to notice things he had perhaps dismissed before. The way Adaora never went to the village stream with the other women. She always fetched water alone before dawn when no one was watching. The way she sometimes stood in the doorway at midnight, looking out at the compound with an expression he could not name. The way she flinched, visibly, bodily, on the rare occasion a neighbor came visiting with a kerosene lamp. He spoke to his friend Chidi about it carefully, without revealing the full strangeness of it. Chidi laughed and said, "Every woman has her peculiarities, my brother. You married a woman, not an explanation." Tobe laughed too, but the splinter burrowed deeper. By the 5th month, the question had grown into something that disturbed his sleep. He would lie awake while Adaora breathed softly beside him and ask the same questions over and over in his own mind. What is she hiding? What is she afraid of? What does a candle have to do with any of it? Is she in danger? Am I? He asked her one final time, 3 weeks before everything ended. He sat her down at the low table, held her hands in his, looked her in the eyes with all the love he had for her visible in his own, and said, "Adaora, I am your husband. Whatever it is, whatever you are carrying, I want to carry it with you. Please tell me."
For a moment, he thought she would. He saw something break open behind her eyes. Her lips parted, her hands trembled in his, and then she closed it all back down, like a door shutting on a bright room, and said, "Some things are not mine to tell, Tobe. Just keep the promise. That is how you love me." He released her hands. He stood up. He went outside and sat on the veranda until the night was fully dark around him. It was a Thursday in the deep of the rainy season. Tobe had been to the market and returned late. Tired and damp, the red mud of the road caked to his boots. The power had been out since morning. Adaora had waited up for him, served him food, and then retired early, saying she was tired. He sat alone at the low table and ate in the dim blue glow of the lantern. And then the lantern's battery failed, and he was in absolute darkness. He reached for the torch. It was dead. He had forgotten to charge it. He sat in the dark for a long while, listening to the rain on the roof, listening to the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere in the village. The darkness was total and disorienting, and a question, that relentless 5-month-old question, rose up in him like floodwater breaking a dam. He told himself he would not. He told himself again. But he found the candle in the kitchen drawer, one he had kept without even fully admitting to himself that he had kept it. His hands were shaking as he picked it up. Not from cold, from something else. From the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something vast and irreversible, and the curiosity inside him was greater than the fear. He hated himself for it, but not enough to stop. He carried the candle to the threshold of the bedroom. Adaora lay on her side, her back to him, perfectly still. The sound of her breathing, slow, deep, the breathing of real sleep, was audible over the rain. He watched her for a long moment. She will never know, he told himself. I will just see, whatever there is to see, and then I will know, and the knowing will be enough, and I will put it out before she wakes. He struck the match. The flame jumped alive in the darkness, small and yellow and trembling. He touched it to the wick of the candle, and the candle caught. The light spread, warm, amber, ordinary light, the kind of light that human hands have made since the beginning of time, and for 1 full second, nothing happened. And then Adaora made a sound. It was not a scream. It was lower than that. It came from somewhere beneath the sound of the rain, beneath the sound of the world, a moan that seemed to rise up from somewhere inside the earth itself. The hair on Tobe's neck and arms stood at full attention. His fingers went rigid around the candle. Adaora began to cry in her sleep, not the way a person cries from a bad dream, not the sniffling, the twitching, the eventual waking. this was different. The tears ran from her closed eyes in thick, silent streams, and her breathing did not change, and her body did not move, and yet the grief on her face was the most absolute thing Tobe had ever witnessed on a human face. He stepped forward, reaching to shake her awake, and then he stopped, because the light fell across her arm and he saw it. There was a crack in her skin, not a wound, not a cut. A crack, like the crack that runs through old clay pottery when the earth beneath it shifts. It ran along the inside of her forearm, hairline thin and faintly luminous at its edges.
And as he stood there, unable to breathe, he watched it extend, slowly, with terrible patience, up toward her elbow. "Adaora!" His voice broke. He lunged forward and shook her shoulder, and she did not wake. She only wept, those thick, silent tears, and the crack spread. Now there was a second one running along her collarbone, and a third along the back of her hand, and the edges of every crack had that awful faint glow, like something behind her skin was burning. He blew out the candle. The darkness crashed back in. He stood trembling in it, ears roaring, and for a moment there was nothing but the rain and his own gasping breath. Then he lit the match again with shaking hands and looked. The cracks were still there, faint but visible, like old lines on a dry riverbed. He pressed his palm against her arm and felt something he had no word for. Not warmth, not cold, but a vibration, like the skin was humming at a frequency too low for ears to catch. "Adaora, please!" She began to come apart. That is the only word for what happened. The cracks deepened, and at their edges her skin began to separate, not bleeding, not tearing, but separating the way cracked earth separates in a drought, revealing only darkness beneath. Her body shot at once, twice, deeply, like a building settling on a broken foundation. The crying continued, utterly silent, utterly ceaseless. Tobe dropped to his knees beside the bed and seized her hands, or what remained of them, and screamed her name. He screamed and screamed until the neighbors came running through the rain and hammered on his door. He could not answer them because he could not release her hands, and he could not stop watching his wife unmake herself in the candlelight he had brought into the room against every promise and every warning she had ever given him. By the time the first pale light of dawn came through the window, Adaora was gone. Not dead, not in the way the village would understand death. The bed was empty, no body, no blood. Only the impression of her weight in the thin mattress and the faint lines on the sheet where the cracks had touched the cloth, and the smell, like old forests and something burning that has no name, that lingered in the room for 7 days afterward. Tobe did not eat for 4 days. He sat in the empty house and stared at the marks on the sheet and did not speak to the neighbors who came and did not eat the food they brought. Chidi came and sat with him in silence, which was more useful than anything anyone else did. The village hummed with its theories. She had run away, she had been a spirit, it was juju, it was the husband, it was God. Tobe had none of it. He was somewhere else entirely, replaying the candle being lit, the crack appearing, the sound she made that was not a scream, over and over and over in the closed room of his mind. On the 5th day, her uncle came. His name was Mazion Wudiwe, and he was an old man, truly old, the kind of old that has gone past frailty and arrived at something harder and drier, like driftwood. He came alone in the early morning with a small cloth bag and a face that held no surprise whatsoever. He sat across from Tobe in the room that still smelled of whatever Adaora had smelt of when she came apart, and he looked at the young man for a long time before he spoke. "You lit the candle," he said. It was not a question. Tobe said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Mazion Wudiwe set down his bag and folded his hands on his knees. "I will tell you now what I should perhaps have told you before you married her, but she did not want you to know. She believed that if you loved her enough, the promise would be enough." She was a woman who believed in the power of love over the power of old things. It was always her weakness, that belief. He told Tobe the story of the curse of Nachi. 3 generations before Adaora was born, a woman in the bloodline of her family, her great-grandmother, a healer of considerable power, had made an enemy of his certain kind. Not a human enemy, something older. The stories varied in their details, but in all of them, the great-grandmother had interfered with something that was not meant to be interfered with. A ceremony at the edge of the forest, a burial that was not a burial, a pact between the living and whatever lives in the dark places of the earth that do not appear on any map. In punishment, that ancient thing had placed a seal upon the women of that bloodline. Not upon their bodies during the day, during ordinary waking life, but upon the other version of them, the sleeping version, the version that exists in the hours when the body rests and whatever we truly are rises toward the surface. The curse was simple and absolute. If candlelight, specifically candlelight, only candlelight, no other source of flame, touches a sleeping woman of that bloodline, the seal breaks open and what it contains is released and the woman unmakes. Unmakes, to be repeated. His voice was a dry, hollow thing. What does that mean? Where does she go? The old man looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. She does not go anywhere, my son. She becomes part of the curse itself. The seal was always a container. When it breaks, what was contained, and what it contained was her, is absorbed. Can it be reversed? The old man was quiet for a long time. The morning birds were loud outside. The compound smelled of wet earth and mango leaves. There are people who say there are ways, he said finally. I have spent 30 years looking for them. I have not found one that I trust. Tobe pressed his hands over his face. He made no sound. The grief in him had gone past sound, had entered that deep, airless space where sorrow becomes a permanent feature of a person's interior landscape, where it ceases to be an event and becomes simply a condition of existence. She loved you, said the old man, more than she had loved anyone. That is why she tried. She believed love was the seal strong enough to hold the other one in place. She was not wrong to believe it. She was only wrong to believe you could sustain it without knowing what you are sustaining it against. He stood, picked up his cloth bag and moved to the door. He paused there, his hand on the frame, the morning light pressing past him into the room. He told me once, he said, and his voice had changed, had gone to something that might have been tenderness in another man, but in him was simply precision, the precision of someone reporting a fact he has carried for years, that the months in this house with you were the only months of her life when she forgot what she carried. That is not nothing, my son. That is, in fact, everything. He left. Tobe sat in the room until the sun moved high and then dropped again toward the hills. He did not move and he did not speak, and eventually the dark came in around him and filled the house, and he sat in it without lighting anything at all. They say that for years afterward, Tobechukwu Nwosu never lit a candle, not from superstition, not from fear, from something else, from a kind of faithfulness that had nowhere left to go, a keeping of the promise in the only direction it could still be kept, which was backward into the past, toward a woman who could no longer benefit from it, but had deserved it all along. He farmed, he ate, he answered when people spoke to him, but there was something in his eyes after that. Not madness, not grief exactly, but the peculiar stillness of a man who has seen behind the world's face and cannot unsee it. On some nights, when the power went out in Oguama and the village sat in its various darks, Tobe's house was the darkest of all. No lantern in the window, no torch glow, just the darkness, absolute and chosen, the way she had asked for it, the way he should have kept it. The old women of the village, who had whispered warnings he had not heeded, said nothing more about it. Mama Ogbonna, who had told him the girl carried something old, would sometimes stand at her doorway and look toward his house in the dark and click her tongue softly and say to no one in particular, "Some knowledge is not for men. Some knowledge is only for those who carry it. The wise man does not demand to see inside every closed room. Some rooms are closed because what is inside them is not yours to look at." Uguama listened. As villages do, it absorbed the story. Let it settle into the soil of its collective memory. Let it become the kind of tale that mothers told their children in low voices when the evening darkened and the matches were too close to hand. Remember Tobe and the woman from Nachi. Remember what a lit candle cost him. And in the bedroom of that small mud house, on the mattress where she had slept, the faint lines that the cracks had left on the sheet remained. No washing removed them, no bleach, no prayer. They stayed, pale and hair-lined thin, and faintly luminous at certain angles in certain lights, like the last signature of something ancient, something that had moved through the world of living people briefly, been loved briefly, and then been reclaimed, like all old things eventually are.